Scandal, betrayal, lust. Three little words that can build a dynasty or tear one to pieces. And when those words slip into the royal bedroom, the results are never just private. No, they become stories that echo across centuries, reshaping nations, rewriting religions, and setting entire empires on fire. Picture this: an emperor, one of the most powerful men in the world, sitting at his council table, maps sprawl before him, generals waiting for orders, kingdoms trembling at his command. And yet, his mind isn't on the war. It isn't on politics. It's on the lover, waiting for him in a candlelit chamber. Strategy forgotten, reason abandoned. He gambles not just his crown, but his people's future for a kiss. Or imagine a queen, polished, regal, untouchable in her silks and jewels. The court bows, the people cheer, but behind the palace walls, there's a different story. A late-night visitor, a whisper in the dark, a secret that, once exposed, won't just ruin reputations. It will topple thrones. Because in history, the royal bed wasn't a place of privacy. It was a battlefield, and the weapons weren't swords or spears. They were hearts, bodies, and the sharp edge of gossip. Now, we like to think of history as orderly. Kings ruling, queens reigning, armies marching, treaties signed with flourish of a quill. But history is messy, chaotic, unpredictable, and some of its biggest earthquakes weren't caused by armies colliding. They were caused by affairs, scandals, and betrayals whispered in bedrooms. Think about it. Cleopatra's liaisons didn't just stir up gossip. They pulled Rome into a spiral of civil war. Henry VIII didn't just chase women. He split his entire kingdom from the Catholic Church because of his obsessions. And Marie Antoinette? She didn't even have an affair. But rumors of one were enough to help light the fuse of revolution. These weren't harmless flings. These were political earthquakes disguised as love stories. Scandal was the currency of power. A rumor could do what an invading army never could: tear apart the very legitimacy of a crown. And betrayal, whether real or fabricated, was a death sentence. When royal desire collided with royal duty, the result wasn't romance. It was catastrophe. And here's the kicker. These stories endure not because of the battles or treaties that followed, but because of the human drama at their core. Strip away the crowns, the castles, the armies, and what's left: people just as flawed, just as reckless, just as vulnerable to passion and pride as the rest of us. But unlike the rest of us, their mistakes were amplified. Their scandals didn't just ruin reputations. They redrew maps. So, let's step into this world together. A world where the royal court was less like a throne room and more like a powder keg. Every whispered rumor was a spark. Every lover's glance was a loaded gun. And when things exploded, they didn't just singe a reputation. They shattered entire empires. Because here's the truth. History isn't a tale of wise kings and noble queens guiding their people with steady hands. It's a drama of lust, betrayal, and human weakness, wrapped in crowns and velvet robes. And the irony? The stronger the throne, the higher the fall. So buckle up. We're about to dive into a saga where love wasn't tender, where scandal wasn't trivial, and where every royal affair carried the weight of nations. Because if passion can topple emperors, if desire can break churches, if rumor can ignite revolutions, then maybe the greatest weapon in history wasn't forged to steal it all. Maybe it was forged in the heart. And yes, history really is this messy. Picture this: a battlefield stretching as far as the eye can see, smoke curling from burning villages, horses screaming, generals barking orders as the ground shakes beneath the march of thousands of soldiers. This is how we imagine empires are born: through fire, steel, and blood, through conquest and the clash of armies, through treaties signed in victory, and dynasties stitched together by war. And yet, here's the twist. For all the blood spilled, for all the empires carved into bones of nations, many of those same empires didn't collapse on the battlefield at all. No, they collapsed in bedrooms, in whispers, in secrets carried through candlelit corridors. Empires fell not to swords, but to seduction, not to armies, but to affairs. Strange, isn't it, that the same king who could order the slaughter of 10,000 men was powerless when faced with a lover's glance. that the same queen who could outwit foreign diplomats was undone by whispers of impropriety, that the fortress of empire, so sturdy from the outside, could be hollowed out by desire. Think about it. When we talk about war, we talk about numbers. Armies of 50,000, fleets of 100 ships. But when we talk about scandal, the number is usually two. A king, a mistress, a queen, a lover. And yet those two could undo what 50,000 soldiers could not. Take a moment. Imagine standing in a great throne room, marble floors, gold-draped walls. The king sits high upon his throne, armored generals waiting for commands. And yet, beneath all this grandeur, a secret festers. One letter, one rumor, one whispered word. An entire illusion of power begins to tremble. Because in monarchies, desire wasn't private. It was public. And it was political dynamite. Why? Because the royal body was not just flesh and blood. It was a symbol of the state, who the king loved, who the queen lay with, who shared the royal bed. These weren't just personal matters. They were matters of succession, of legitimacy, of treaties and dynasties. If the queen was accused of adultery, the heir could be branded a bastard. If the king abandoned his wife for another, alliances collapsed. And suddenly, what began as passion turned into war. History is full of this cruel paradox. Empires forge in fire, crumbling in whispers. A soldier could fight his way across a continent and die never knowing that the fate of his nation was sealed not on the battlefield, but in the silence of a private chamber. Let's pause for a second. Doesn't that feel absurd? Imagine an empire spending years training armies, stockpiling weapons, building castles, only to be undone because the king fancied someone new. Imagine the generals' faces when they realized their victories meant nothing against scandal. This is why royal affairs weren't just gossip. They were earthquakes, political earthquakes. Picture Cleopatra. Her empire wasn't secure by walls or swords alone. It was held by charm, by alliances forged in bed as much as in council. Picture Henry VIII, who split his entire kingdom from the Catholic Church over his obsession with a woman. Think of Anne Boleyn, whose downfall shifted England forever. Think of Marie Antoinette, accused of decadence and scandal, whose very reputation helped ignite revolution. These aren't side stories. These are the stories. But here's the thing. When we think of history, we often want it clean. Kings and their crowns, queens and their jewels, armies on the march. We want noble speeches and grand battles. But history is messy. History is human. And the truth is, for every epic war that shaped an empire, there was often a scandal lurking in the background, shaping it even more. Think about how strange this is. Armies needed years to train. Wars took months to plan. But scandal? Scandal could erupt overnight. One rumor could spread like wildfire, faster than any army could march. One pamphlet, one whispered secret, could topple more power than 100 generals combined. It wasn't always about truth, either. Often it didn't matter if the affair was real. All that mattered was the story. If people believed it, if rivals could weaponize it, if the mob could be stirred by it, then the scandal was real enough. Real enough to send queens to the scaffold. Real enough to break alliances. Real enough to collapse dynasties. And here's the tragedy. The kings and queens at the heart of these affairs were often brilliant rulers in their own right. They commanded armies. They managed economies. They balanced rival factions. And yet, none of that mattered when their personal lives became weapons against them. The same ruler who could survive assassinations or rebellions could not survive a rumor of infidelity. So, let's lay it out clearly. Empires are built on conquest, but they can be destroyed by desire. Thrones are won with swords, but lost with secrets. And the stage where all of this plays out isn't the battlefield. It's the bedroom. It's ironic, isn't it? Generals believed they were shaping history with their campaigns. Statesmen believed they were deciding the future with treaties. But more often than not, history was reshaped by passion, by jealousy, by betrayal. So when we step into the stories of Cleopatra, Henry VIII, Catherine the Great, Marie Antoinette, and countless others, we aren't stepping into juicy royal gossip. We are stepping into the very engines of history. Because while battles were fought on the open field, history's greatest collapses were born in candlelit chambers. Imagine it. a battlefield roaring with cannons and muskets, while far away, a queen's whispered confession sparks the real turning point. Imagine a coronation, the crown raised above a monarch's head, while rumors about the royal bed are already gnawing at its foundation. Imagine a palace filled with laughter and music, while courtiers in the shadows plot to twist a rumor into revolution. That's the paradox. Thrones built on war, broken by desire, and this is where our story begins. Imagine walking through the echoing halls of a royal palace. Marble floors gleam, chandeliers flicker, servants glide silently, heads bowed, but listen closely. Beneath the grandeur, beneath the etiquette, there's another current, whispers. Soft, poisonous, unstoppable. The true currency of power in a royal court wasn't just gold or armies or land. It was gossip. Yes, gossip. The kind of thing we treat like idle chatter today. Back then it could crown a king or send a queen to the scaffold. It was the fuel that powered the machine of monarchy. A single rumor could poison a bloodline. A whisper could erase the legitimacy of an heir. And once doubt took hold, no fortress, no treaty, no army could shield a throne. Think about it. Kings ruled nations. Queens represented dynasties. Their very bodies symbolized power. So if someone whispered that a queen was unfaithful, suddenly, the heir to the throne wasn't the heir at all. He was a bastard. One rumor, and a dynasty that seemed eternal began to wobble. Now, here's the darkly funny part. The people we imagine as serious men of state, ambassadors, diplomats, ministers, spent half their time obsessing over royal bedrooms. Forget crop failures. Forget trade wars. What mattered most was who was sneaking down the corridor after dark, whose carriage was parked outside the palace too often. These were the real national security reports. Picture an ambassador writing back to his king. You'd expect him to report on alliances, taxes, military strength. Instead, he's whispering across continents. Your Majesty, it appears the Queen has a fondness for a certain court musician. Recommend caution in future treaties. International relations decided by pillow talk. And it wasn't just nobles and diplomats. The entire court was infected by paranoia. Servants eavesdropped as they poured wine. Ladies-in-waiting carried tales, weaving intrigue like spiders spin webs. Guards shared rumors while pacing their posts. The palace itself became less a fortress and more a nest of vipers, each waiting for the right moment to strike with words sharper than any blade. Here's the danger. Gossip is invisible. You can't stop it at the gate. You can't fight it on a battlefield. It seeps through walls, rides on servants' tongues, hides in letters passed beneath doors. And once it spreads, it multiplies. One scandal whispered in a corner becomes 10 rumors shouted in the streets. By the time the monarch hears it, their image is already burning. But let's not pretend this was harmless chatter. No, this was deadly serious. Wars were sparked not just by armies, but by rumors of affairs. Rebellions were justified by scandal. Rival factions weaponized gossip the way modern politicians weaponize headlines. To say gossip was powerful undersells it. Gossip was a weapon of mass destruction, quiet, invisible, but capable of shattering empires. Imagine you're a noble at court. You see a glance between the queen and a handsome officer. Do you ignore it? Of course not. You exaggerate it, you whisper it, you spread it. Because if the queen falls, maybe you rise. That's the game. And in that game, truth didn't matter. What mattered was belief. Now pause for a second and think, isn't this absurdly familiar? Swap out the torchlit corridors for Twitter threads, the whispered letters for tabloids, and you've got the same story. Entire reputations toppled overnight, not by fact, but by perception. Back then, they didn't need hashtags, just a servant with a sharp tongue. And oh, the paranoia it bred. Monarchs trusted no one. Queens surrounded themselves with loyal ladies, only to be betrayed. Kings spied on their own courtiers, terrified that whispers about mistresses or illegitimate heirs would stain their reign. Every smile could hide a rumor. Every laugh could carry an insult. The palace was less a home and more a stage, with everyone performing innocence while plotting scandal. Some monarchs even tried to outwit the rumor mill. They'd publicly flaunt lovers, thinking it was better to control the narrative than be controlled by it. Others doubled down on secrecy, sneaking through hidden passages at night, hoping the walls themselves wouldn't talk. Spoiler alert, the walls always talked. Here's the cruel truth. A monarch could survive assassination attempts, invasions, even bankrupt economies. But they couldn't survive a reputation destroyed by gossip. Once the people believed their ruler was corrupt, weak, or immoral, the crown itself became brittle. And crowns, once cracked, don't mend. Picture the mob outside the palace. Torches raised, pamphlets in hand. Do they storm the gates because of a lost war? Sometimes. But often it's because of scandal. Because of what they think their queen did. Because of what they heard about their king. The people could endure hunger, but they would not endure the humiliation of a ruler mocked by rumor. So, let's call it what it was. Gossip wasn't idle chatter. It was a weapon, a poison, deadlier than steel. And everyone in the palace knew it. Every royal affair, every stolen glance, every whispered promise. It wasn't just passion. It was playing with fire in a palace filled with kindling. The irony? Kings and queens spent their lives projecting strength. Armies, crowns, ceremonies, divine authority. But the thing that undid them wasn't an army at the gate. It was a whisper behind a curtain. A secret past between servants. A story that spread faster than truth. So, when we talk about royal affairs, remember this. They weren't private at all. They were public time bombs, ticking beneath thrones. Every rumor was a fuse. And when those fuses lit, empires burned. Because in the end, love in a palace wasn't romance. It was politics. And gossip wasn't entertainment. It was power. And that power was deadly. Picture this, a candlelit chamber. Two figures whispering in the dark, hands brushing across velvet sheets. On the surface, it looks like passion, a stolen moment, a private indulgence. But in truth, that bed is about to decide the fate of nations. Because in the world of royalty, passion was never just passion. It was politics. Take Cleopatra. Cleopatra, the queen who turned seduction into statecraft. Her liaisons with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony weren't just bedroom gossip. They were strategic maneuvers. When Cleopatra entwined herself with Rome's most powerful men, she wasn't only sharing kisses. She was gambling with Egypt's survival. And Rome? Rome was watching. Senators hissed that Antony was bewitched, that Caesar had been ensnared, that Egypt's queen was pulling strings in the shadows. One affair, and suddenly Rome wasn't just fighting civil wars. It was fighting over love. And spoiler alert, it didn't end well. Or let's leap across time and space to Tudor England. Henry VIII, the king who turned marriage into a weapon and lust into a wrecking ball. His obsession with Anne Boleyn didn't just cause palace drama. It split Christendom. Think about that for a moment. A king wanted a new wife, and the result was an entirely new church. Imagine breaking Europe just because you couldn't keep your vows straight. But that's exactly what happened. A personal obsession became a theological earthquake. Now, let's slide forward again to France. The glittering court of Versailles, gold ceilings, silk gowns, powdered wigs, and Marie Antoinette, a queen already drowning in resentment. She didn't even need to commit an affair. Rumors alone were enough to destroy her. Pamphlets painted her as decadent, manipulative, even depraved. She was accused of affairs she never had, of desires she never pursued. And those rumors, they helped fuel a revolution. Not cannons, not armies, rumors. Imagine losing your head, not to the sword of an enemy general, but to the whispers of pamphleteers. Do you see the pattern? These weren't harmless love stories tucked in the margins of history. These were political grenades disguised as romances. When passion entered the palace, it redrew maps, birthed religions, toppled monarchies, and left thrones empty. And yet, here's the irony. These rulers thought they were untouchable. Emperors, queens, kings. They believed their crowns made them immune to consequences. But love doesn't care about crowns. Lust doesn't care about legitimacy. Scandal doesn't care about armies. When passion became political, no amount of power could shield them. Think of it this way. Battles take years to plan. Empires are built over centuries. But affairs, they can spark overnight. One glance at a feast. One letter slipped beneath a door, one night in the wrong bed, and suddenly, entire kingdoms tremble. It's almost laughable. Generals trained for decades to win wars, but they were outmatched by gossip about who was sneaking down palace corridors. Ministers crafted treaties with painstaking detail, only for them to unravel because the king fancied someone new. Thrones that had weathered invasions fell because of desire. Isn't that absurd? And yet, that's exactly how history unfolded. Let's not sugarcoat it. These weren't fairy tales. Cleopatra's romance ended with Antony dead, and her kingdom swallowed by Rome. Henry VIII's passion ended with Anne Boleyn's head rolling and his realm bleeding from religious wars. Marie Antoinette's reputation ended with a guillotine. These weren't love stories. They were disasters, dressed up as romances. And here's the kicker. Every time, the pattern repeats. The affair starts as a whisper, grows into a scandal, and ends as a crisis. And in the end, the crown, the very symbol of permanence, cracks under the weight of desire. So let's set the stage properly. We're not about to tell stories of courtly love or romantic escapades. No, we're about to tell stories where love letters were more dangerous than battle plans, where kisses carried more risk than swords, where royal passion wasn't a private indulgence but a public catastrophe. Picture standing in a grand hall filled with courtiers, each one smiling politely, each one secretly calculating how to twist the latest rumor to their advantage. Behind every laugh, a dagger. Behind every bow, a plot. And in the center, a monarch who thinks they are ruling a kingdom, when in reality, the kingdom is ruling them through gossip, through scandal, through desire. These rulers may have thought they were chasing love. In reality, they were racing toward ruin. And as we dive deeper, you'll see just how often lust cracked crowns, how often betrayal redrew maps, and how often rumor proved deadlier than steel. So, prepare yourself, because in this story, passion is never private. It's political, and history's most intimate moments, they're also its most catastrophic. Because when passion becomes political, the world burns. Picture this, the Nile at dusk. The water glitters gold beneath a sinking sun, and there, gliding silently across the river, is a barge unlike anything the world had ever seen. Perfumed sails catch the breeze. Musicians play soft, intoxicating melodies. Incense burns, carrying whispers of spice into the air. And at the center, reclining like a goddess brought to life, is Cleopatra. This isn't just pageantry. This is war by other means. Cleopatra didn't march armies to Caesar's doorstep. She sailed herself into his imagination. She understood something most rulers never did. Power isn't just enforced with swords. It's a deuce and to surrender. Cleopatra was not the helpless beauty Roman propaganda painted her to be. She was a strategist. A woman raised in a dynasty riddled with betrayal, where brothers poisoned brothers and sisters plotted against sisters. Survival in Egypt's royal house was a blood sport, and Cleopatra? She mastered it. By the time she met Julius Caesar, she knew charm could be deadlier than any army. So, she staged her entrance like a performance. Draped in luxury, scented with honey and spice, she turned seduction into statecraft. Imagine Caesar, battle-hardened, ruthless, the conqueror Gaul, watching this young queen glide toward him, radiating not just beauty but authority. He wasn't just meeting a lover. He was meeting a rival strategist who knew exactly what card she held. And it worked. Caesar didn't just fall for Cleopatra's allure. He bound himself to her politically. Their liaison gave her a powerful protector. For him, it offered Egypt's wealth and legitimacy in the East. But in Rome? Oh, in Rome it was scandal. Senators sneered that Caesar had been bewitched. They whispered that Cleopatra wasn't a queen at all, but a temptress who dared to bend Rome's greatest man. And Rome hated that. They hated the idea of a foreign woman pulling strings in their sacred republic. But Cleopatra wasn't finished. When Caesar was assassinated, she pivoted. She read the shifting winds of power and turned her gaze to Mark Antony, Rome's other giant. Antony, flamboyant, ambitious, reckless. Cleopatra played him like a master musician. When she invited him to meet her in Tarsus, she didn't arrive as a supplicant. She arrived like a goddess. Picture the scene. Antony waits on the riverbank, and then her barge glides into view. Purple sails billow. Oars of silver flash in the sunlight. Cleopatra sits beneath a golden canopy, dressed as Venus, the goddess of love herself. Perfume fills the air. Crowds gather to watch, spellbound. Antony, warrior, general, Roman conqueror, stands transfixed. She wasn't just walking into a meeting. She was rewriting the script. And from that moment, Antony was hers. Their partnership wasn't merely romantic. It was an alliance. Egypt needed Rome's muscle. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund his wars. But it was more than that. Cleopatra gave him legitimacy, the sense of grandeur that Rome alone couldn't provide. Together, they envisioned a new world, a new order, with themselves at its center. But with passion came danger. In Rome, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, fumed. He painted Antony as a traitor, bewitched by a foreign witch. He spread pamphlets, whispers, venom. Antony had abandoned Rome for lust. Cleopatra was cast not as a queen, but as a corrupter. Every feast they held, every son they bore, became propaganda in Octavian's hands. And make no mistake, this wasn't gossip for gossip's sake. It was strategy. Octavian weaponized scandal. He knew Romans feared nothing more than weakness. And Antony, under Cleopatra's spell, was the perfect target. Rumors swirled. Antony, dressed like an Egyptian, dined like a decadent, kissed Cleopatra's feet. Was it true? Maybe. Did it matter? Not at all. What mattered was the image. Rome's proud general reduced to Cleopatra's puppet. And so, what began as passion grew into war. Love letters became battle cries. Their union, scandalous and magnetic, polarized the Mediterranean world. Supporters saw them as gods reborn. Antony as Dionysus, Cleopatra as Isis. Enemies saw them as traitors, rebels against Rome's destiny. And in the middle, the fragile survival of Egypt itself. Cleopatra had gambled everything. Her body, her image, her throne. And for a time it worked. She and Antony ruled as if the Mediterranean was theirs. They held court in splendor, dressed as gods, showered in riches, adored by followers. It was dazzling. It was intoxicating. But love always comes with a cost. That cost was Actium, a battle not just of ships, but of perception. Octavian framed it as Rome versus corruption, patriotism versus lust. And when the smoke cleared, Antony and Cleopatra's dreams lay shattered. Their passion, once their strength, had become their undoing. Yet, even in ruin, Cleopatra refused to surrender her power. Legend tells us she chose her death on her own terms. A venomous speed pressed to her breast, rather than be paraded in chains through Rome. Was it true? Maybe. But like everything with Cleopatra, the story mattered more than the fact. She wanted to be remembered not as a victim, but as a queen who lived and died on her own terms. And remembered she was. For 2,000 years, her name has been whispered as the very embodiment of seduction, power, and strategy. Cleopatra didn't just play the Game of Thrones. She rewrote the rules. She turned romance into politics, desire into destiny. She showed the world that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in history isn't a sword or an army. It's a glance, a touch, a queen who knew exactly what she wanted. She was playing 4D chess with eyeliner. And though she lost in the end, her story still shapes how we think of power, love, and ruin. Because in Cleopatra's world, seduction was statecraft, and the stakes were empires. Picture this: Tudor England, the air thick with incense, church bells ringing, the court buzzing with music, dancing, and gossip. And at the center of it all, Henry VIII, towering, broad, red-haired, dressed in silks and jewels. A king who had everything: wealth, power, a kingdom at peace. But one thing gnawed at him. One thing kept him awake at night: an heir, a son to secure his dynasty. Now, Henry already had a wife, Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess, devout, dignified, respected. But after years of marriage, she gave him no surviving sons. For Henry, That wasn't just disappointment. It was a national crisis. Dynasties weren't secured by love. They were secured by bloodlines. And without a male heir, Henry saw shadows of civil war looming. Enter Anne Boleyn, not the most beautiful woman in court, perhaps, but captivating, sharp, ambitious, unwilling to be just another royal mistress. Henry had bedded many women, but played a different game. She refused him. She held back. She made him chase. And in doing so, she flipped the script. Suddenly, England's king, used to commanding armies with a word, was begging, writing letters filled with longing, promising marriage, promising crowns. But here's the problem. Henry was already married, and in the Catholic world of the 16th century, that was supposed to be final. Divorce was an option. Annulment? Possible, but rare, and only the Pope could grant it. So what does Henry do? He petitions Rome. He asks Pope Clement for an annulment. His argument? That God was punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. Convenient theology. But the Pope said no. Why? Politics. Catherine of Aragon was the aunt of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, one of the most powerful men in Europe. Granting Henry's request would anger Charles, and the Pope wasn't about to risk war for Henry's crush. And here's where the story takes a turn from soap opera to seismic. Henry didn't give up. Instead, he broke away. He cut ties with Rome. He declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. Also, he could marry Anne. Imagine ghosting the Pope because your crush said so. That's essentially what happened. But the consequences? Catastrophic. Monasteries dissolved. Priests forced to choose between Rome and the king. Land seized. Wealth redistributed. Those who opposed Henry's new church, branded traitors. Executed. Thomas More, once Henry's loyal friend, was beheaded for refusing to recognize him as head of the church. All of this because Henry wanted Anne. And yet, when he finally married her, the fairy tale soured quickly and gave him a daughter, Elizabeth. Brilliant, destined to be one of England's greatest monarchs, but at the time, disappointment. Henry wanted a son, and sharp tongue and fiery personality clashed with Henry's temper. Rumors of infidelity swirled, and within 3 years, she stood accused of adultery and treason. The charges were almost certainly false. But in Henry's world, truth didn't matter. Perception did. Picture and walking to the scaffold at the Tower of London. Dignified. Calm. Knowing her head was about to roll. Not for crimes committed, but for daring to play the game and lose. And Henry? Already eyeing his next wife. This became a pattern. 6 wives in total. Each marriage wasn't just personal. It was political. Each wife carried alliances, risks, and dangers. Catherine of Aragon tied Henry to Spain, and Boleyn fractured England from Rome. Jane Seymour gave him his long-awaited son, but died days later. And of Cleves brought an awkward political match. Henry dissolved in disgust. Catherine Howard, young and reckless, lost her head like Anne, and Catherine Parr, the survivor, outlived the king himself. Each love, each betrayal, each execution was more than drama. It was a kingdom's destiny. Thousands died in religious wars sparked by Henry's defiance of Rome. England's landscape was forever changed by the destruction of monasteries. Generations lived with the ripple effects of a king's obsession. And yet, there's a dark comedy in it all. The most powerful man in England, with armies and riches at his command, brought to ruinous decisions by passion, by desire, by the refusal of one woman to give him what he craved most. Think about the absurdity. Entire religions torn apart, thousands executed, nations realigned. All because Henry couldn't get a divorce. All because he couldn't accept disappointment. But this is the truth of royal affairs. They weren't whispers in bedrooms. They were detonations in the halls of power. Henry's pursuit of Anne Boleyn wasn't just lust. It was an earthquake that split Christendom. So when you think of Henry VIII, don't just picture the gluttonous king with turkey legs and 6 wives. Picture a man whose personal obsession changed the faith of millions. Picture a king so desperate for love, or perhaps legacy, that he tore down the very church that crowned him. Because in Tudor England, desire didn't stay in the bedroom. It spilled into the pulpit, into the law, into the lives of every man, woman, and child in the kingdom. And when the dust settled, England was never the same. Picture this: Russia in the 18th century, vast, icy, stretching from Europe's polished courts to the endless wilderness of Siberia. And at the very center of this empire sits a woman, Catherine, not just a queen, an empress, Catherine the Great, a ruler whose name alone suggests power, majesty, permanence. But here's the twist. For all her reforms, her wars, her victories, what did people talk about? Not her policies, not her schools, not her modernizing laws. No, they gossiped about her bedroom. Let's rewind. Catherine wasn't even Russian by birth. She was a German princess, married off to Peter III, an heir more interested in toy soldiers than ruling a real army. Their marriage was loveless, bitter, humiliating. Peter drank, he played, he ignored her. Catherine, sharp and ambitious, understood early if she was going to survive in Russia, she'd have to carve her own path. And when the moment came, when Peter's incompetence threatened the throne, she seized power in a coup. Bold, daring, ruthless. Catherine didn't inherit the empire. She took it. From there, she became one of the most effective rulers Russia ever had. She expanded borders, reaching deeper into Europe and Asia. She built schools, sponsored the arts, invited philosophers like Voltaire to correspond with her. She dreamed of turning Russia into a modern, enlightened empire. By all accounts, Catherine was brilliant, visionary, pragmatic, and yet, for every law she passed, for every territory she gained, there was one thing she could never conquer: gossip. Rumors became her shadow. Courtiers whispered about her lovers. Yes, she had them. Handsome military men, charismatic advisors. She was powerful, unmarried, and human. But whispers don't stop at truth. They grow. They twist. Soon, her detractors painted her not as a ruler, but as a nymphomaniac, incapable of governing without a man in her bed. Imagine the absurdity. Catherine modernized an empire spanning millions of square miles, but Europe's gossip mills wanted to know, who warmed her sheets last night? Foreign ambassadors reported not just on her policies, but on her supposed affairs. Satirical pamphlets painted her as scandalous. Courtiers spread stories that blended fact with venom. The woman who had outmaneuvered generals and dethroned the Tsar was reduced, in the eyes of her enemies, to caricature. And then, of course, came the most infamous rumor of all. You probably heard it. The grotesque lie about Catherine and a horse. A myth so ridiculous it almost defies belief. There's no evidence, no truth, nothing but slander. Yet it spread. Why? Because nothing discredits a powerful woman faster than attacking her sexuality. It wasn't just a smear. It was propaganda, designed to cut her down to size, designed to remind the world, no matter her achievements, she would always be judged by her body. But Catherine wasn't naive. She knew her reputation was both weapon and weakness. She used her image of charm, even her relationships, to secure loyalty. Lovers often became trusted advisors, military commanders, or political allies. Passion and power overlapped. It was messy, yes, but it was calculated. And for years it worked. Still, reputation is a battlefield you can't fully control. Catherine built schools, but people whisper about her scandals. She crushed uprisings, but gossip spread faster than victory. She corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers, but detractors laughed behind closed doors about her supposed insatiability. And here's the cruel irony. Catherine ruled one of the largest empires on earth. She faced rebellions, plagues, wars. She steered Russia through decades of turmoil. And yet, the story that survives most loudly isn't her victories. It's the slander, the rumors, the filth thrown at her name. Think about that. An empress who ruled longer than nearly any other Russian monarch. An empire transformed under her watch. And history still can't shake the lies told about her bedroom. It's a familiar pattern, isn't it? Powerful men are remembered for their conquests, their wars, their crowns. Powerful women? Too often, they're remembered for gossip, for whispers, for things that had nothing to do with their leadership. Catherine wasn't just fighting enemies on battlefields. She was fighting enemies in salons, in pamphlets, in jokes whispered across Europe, and that battle never truly ended. Even today, her name carries those rumors. The slander outlived the truth. But let's not forget the reality. Catherine was one of the greatest rulers of her age. She expanded her empire, modernized its laws, and brought Enlightenment ideals into a land still steeped in medieval traditions. She survived palace intrigue, rebellions, and endless attempts to discredit her, and she left Russia stronger than she found it. So, yes, her private life became a weapon for her enemies. Yes, the gossip was deadly. But here's the part her detractors never understood. Catherine's legacy wasn't defined by rumor. It was defined by power, by reform, by her refusal to be controlled by scandal. Still, the whispers remind us of a sobering truth. In monarchies, reputation could be as dangerous as rebellion. A ruler could survive war, but not always a rumor. And Catherine the Great? She lived and died with both. Picture this, the whisper in the dark. A servant leans close to another in a palace corridor. Nothing more than a passing comment. A rumor about the queen. A rumor about the king. It's quiet, fragile, harmless. But then, someone repeats it. And someone else. And by the time it crosses the threshold of the throne room, that whisper has turned into a weapon. This is how empires tremble. Not from cannons. Not from invasions. From whispers. Across history, across cultures, the pattern repeats. Monarchs thought their private lives were theirs alone, but they weren't. Every glance, every affair, every secret meeting became public property the moment it was suspected. And once it became public, the consequences were catastrophic. Take Europe. Courts filled with alliances sealed by marriage. A king's wife wasn't just a partner. She was a treaty in human form, a connection to Spain or France or the Holy Roman Empire. So what happens when that wife is cast aside? Or worse, accused of infidelity? Suddenly the treaty collapses. Diplomatic bridges burn. Wars ignite. But it wasn't just Europe. In Eastern dynasties, emperors' concubines or queens could shape succession. A favored mistress might secure her son's future or trigger rival factions to revolt. A single rumor about favoritism could lead to blood in the palace halls. It didn't matter the culture, the language, the empire. Private choices had public consequences. And here's the irony. Many of these affairs didn't even begin as grand betrayals. Sometimes they were rebellions against loveless, arranged marriages. A king bored of a queen chosen for politics. A queen lonely in a court that silenced her. Sometimes they were calculated moves, a way to secure loyalty, to bind a faction closer. And sometimes, yes, they were just moments of weakness. Human, ordinary. But in a palace, nothing was ever ordinary, because once a whisper escaped, it snowballed. A king's mistress became evidence of corruption. A queen's supposed affair delegitimized her children. The crown itself cracked under the weight of suspicion. It starts with a rumor. It grows into a scandal. And before long, empires are trembling. Imagine being a monarch, sitting on a gilded throne, commanding armies, holding the lives of millions in your hands, and knowing that none of it could save you from gossip, that your legacy could be undone not by an invading army, but by servants whispering your secrets in kitchens. Pamphlets turned whispers into megaphones. One rumor scrawled on parchment, passed hand to hand, became a rallying cry. In France, these pamphlets portrayed queens as adulteresses, corrupt, obsessed with luxury and lust. Whether true or not didn't matter. Once the people believed, the damage was irreversible. A revolution could rise from nothing more than scandal. And in England, whispers about Henry's queens didn't just ruin reputations. They ended lives. And Boleyn, Catherine Howard, accused, tried, and executed. Their supposed affairs weren't just marital betrayals. They were painted as acts of treason. And treason demanded blood. But pause here. Step back. Do you see the tragic absurdity? Monarchs could survive battles, sieges, rebellions. But they couldn't survive perception. Reputation was a crown more fragile than gold. Once cracked, it shattered. And so, the courts of kings and queens became nests of paranoia. Everyone listening, everyone watching, nobles waiting for their chance to twist a rumor into a blade, spies reporting who dined with whom, servants turning small truths into large fictions. A glance could be mistaken for betrayal. A laugh could be interpreted as seduction. The entire court danced not just on polished marble floors, but on the edge of ruin. Think of Catherine the Great, building schools, expanding her empire, writing to philosophers. And what did enemies whisper? Lies about her lovers, lies about her desires. A grotesque rumor about a horse that still stains her legacy centuries later. Did it matter that it wasn't true? No. What mattered was that it stuck. Think of Marie Antoinette, young, foreign, isolated in the glittering halls of Versailles. Her greatest crime wasn't extravagance. It was perception. Pamphlets portrayed her as adulterous, corrupt, depraved. She didn't have to do anything. The rumors did the work. And those rumors helped drag her to the guillotine. Think of Cleopatra, a queen who used her charm strategically, binding herself to Caesar, then Antony. Rome painted her as a witch, a seductress, a foreign corrupter. It wasn't enough to kill her reputation. They turned her love life into justification for war. And in the end, she and Antony lost everything. Different empires, different centuries. Same story. Passion turned political. Gossip turned deadly. And yet, the whispers always began so small. A glance across a banquet table. A lover's note slipped under a door. A late-night carriage scene in the wrong place. Small things. Human things. But in a palace, small things became detonators. Here's the suspense. You never knew which rumor would ignite, which whisper would spread, which scandal would reach the people and tip the balance of power. It could take years. Or it could take a single night. And once it caught fire, there was no stopping it. The mob outside the palace didn't care if the story was true. The rival court across the sea didn't care if the tale was exaggerated. All they cared about was that it was useful. And useful rumors are more dangerous than any army. So, as we leave this chapter of the story, remember, empires were never just brought down by armies and invasions. They were brought down by whispers, by scandals, by rumors that grew until they consumed crowns. Because in the Game of Thrones, love was never private. It was public dynamite. And when that dynamite went off, it didn't just wound reputations. It shattered empires. Picture this, the Mediterranean, shimmering beneath the sun. Ships at the horizon, sails billowing. At the center of it all, two figures whose names would echo through eternity. Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Lovers, allies, rivals to an empire. Their romance wasn't just a private affair. It was a political earthquake. Mark Antony, Rome's golden boy, a general of legend, loyal once to Julius Caesar, now one of three men dividing up the Roman world. And Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, brilliant, charismatic, a queen who could turn seduction into strategy. Together, they were intoxicating, dangerous. To their supporters, they were gods on earth. Antony, Dionysus reborn. Cleopatra, Isis incarnate. But to Rome, to Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and rival, they were poison. Their love wasn't passion, it was treason. Octavian knew exactly how to play it. He painted Antony not as a hero, but as a man bewitched, ensnared, a once great general who had abandoned Roman virtue for the charms of a foreign queen. Cleopatra became the villain of the story, a sorceress, a temptress, a woman who dared to corrupt Rome itself. Imagine the propaganda. Pamphlets spreading whispers. Antony wears Egyptian robes. Antony dines like a king, drunk on decadence. Antony kneels before Cleopatra as her slave. Were these true? Maybe. Probably exaggerated. But in politics, truth doesn't matter. The story does. And the story was lethal. Picture the Senate in torchlit council. Octavian rising, voice cold, denouncing Antony as a traitor. Senators nodding, whispering, terrified that Rome's destiny might slip away to the east. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, Antony and Cleopatra revel. Feasts stretch long into the night. Gold and jewels gleam. Music echoes. They perform as rulers of the world. They believe their love is untouchable. But the cracks are already spreading. Antony was supposed to be Rome's protector, Rome's champion. Instead, he's giving away Roman provinces as gifts to Cleopatra and her children. That's not just scandal, that's betrayal. To Romans, it's the unthinkable. A general surrendering Rome's legacy to a foreign dynasty. And Octavian? He doesn't need to invent outrage. He only has to amplify it. It's the ultimate smear campaign. And it works. Antony's soldiers begin to doubt. His allies waver. Because if their commander is no longer loyal to Rome, then who is he loyal to? Meanwhile, Cleopatra remains defiant. She knows the stakes. Egypt's survival hangs on Antony. Without him, she's vulnerable. So she doubles down. She stands by him at every feast, every public appearance, every moment. Their love becomes their armor. But love in politics is never enough. The tension builds. Letters fly across the Mediterranean. Some intercepted, some forged. Every word becomes ammunition. Rome believes Antony has abandoned his wife in Rome for Cleopatra. Rumors swirl that he plans to move the capital to Alexandria. That Cleopatra dreams of ruling the world from the Nile. Are they true? Who cares? The whispers alone are enough to make Rome seethe. And so the stage is set. Two lovers on one side, Octavian and Rome on the other. The fate of the world balanced not on armies alone, but on a scandal. Now imagine Antony himself. A man torn. On one side, his duty to Rome. On the other, his devotion to Cleopatra. Which would he choose? History tells us he chose love. He chose Cleopatra. And in doing so, he gave Octavian the perfect weapon. Because by now, this wasn't just politics. It was personal. Octavian versus Antony. West versus East. Duty versus desire. And all of it, every whisper, every pamphlet, every intercepted letter, was marching toward one inevitable moment. Actium. Actium. A naval battle that would decide everything. Picture the warships gathering. Roman galleys, or slicing the sea. Egyptian vessels gleaming in the sun. Cleopatra herself on board, commanding her fleet. This wasn't just war. It was theater. Two lovers facing down the wrath of Rome. The suspense is unbearable. Soldiers wonder, will Antony fight for Rome or for Cleopatra? Captains murmur, what happens if they lose? And through it all, Octavian waits. Patient, cold, knowing he's already won half the battle through propaganda. Because here's the truth. Even before the first spear flew, Antony was weakened. His image, his reputation, his legacy, already shattered by whispers. He was no longer the unshakable Roman general. He was Cleopatra's man. And that title was a death sentence. But pause here. Isn't it absurd? Imagine losing an empire, not because of armies, but because of eyeliner. Cleopatra's beauty, her charisma, her brilliance, weaponized against Antony by his enemies. Two lovers against the world. And yet the world was winning. When the battle came, chaos ruled. Warships clashed. Fires burned. And in the midst of it all, Cleopatra made her move. She retreated with her fleet. Antony followed. Was it strategy? Panic? Love? Historians argue still. But the result was the same. His forces crumbled. His allies deserted. His reputation was annihilated. From that moment, their fate was sealed. The lovers who dreamed of ruling the world were now fugitives in their own kingdom. And Octavian? He marched to victory, Rome at his back, the world at his feet. Antony, broken, would take his own life. Cleopatra, cornered, would choose her own death rather than be paraded through Rome. Their story ended not in triumph, but in tragedy. Two lovers undone by scandal, by rumor, by politics. But let's not forget the deeper truth. This wasn't just romance gone wrong. This was love turned into treason, desire twisted into propaganda, a passion weaponized to destroy an empire. Cleopatra and Antony believed their love made them untouchable, but Octavian proved something chilling. In politics, love isn't strength. Love is vulnerability, and when exploited, It can bring down even the mightiest. So remember their story, not as a tale of star-crossed lovers, but as a warning. When passion collides with politics, the world burns. And sometimes, all it takes to topple an empire is a whisper. Picture this, the glittering court of Tudor England. Music echoing in great halls, dancers spinning in velvet gowns, gossip slithering between courtiers like smoke. And at the very center, Henry VIII, the king who treated marriage like a personal sport, and in the process, managed to fracture an entire religion. Henry was larger than life, literally and figuratively, towering, broad-shouldered, dressed in gold and jewels. He saw himself as God's chosen ruler. Yet for all his power, he was haunted by one obsession, producing a male heir. That obsession, that relentless hunger for sons, would break families, shatter alliances, and rip Europe's spiritual fabric in half. Let's start with Catherine of Aragon, his first queen. Spanish, devout, politically powerful. For years she stood by Henry's side, and the people adored her, but she failed to give him a surviving son. To Henry, this wasn't fate, it was punishment. He convinced himself that God had cursed his marriage, and so he looked elsewhere. Enter Anne Boleyn, clever, sharp-tongued, a woman who refused to be just another royal mistress. She made Henry chase her, letters filled with longing, promises of crowns. And soon, Henry was ready to move heaven and earth to make and his queen. Problem was, he already had a wife, and the Pope wasn't about to let him discard Catherine. So what does Henry do? He doesn't just break his marriage. He breaks the church. He declares himself head of a new one, the Church of England. Imagine ghosting the Pope, but with the weight of an entire nation behind you. That's what Henry did. And it wasn't just a romantic gamble. It was a political earthquake. Monasteries seized. Priests executed. Thousands dead in the aftermath of a king's obsession. But did Anne's coronation solve his crisis? Hardly. She gave him a daughter, Elizabeth. Brilliant, yes, but not the son Henry craved. Their marriage quickly soured, and once the object of his desire became the target of his rage. Factions whispered, enemies plotted, rumors swirled that she had taken lovers. The charges were flimsy, almost certainly false. But truth didn't matter. What mattered was Henry wanted her gone. Picture Anne in the Tower, pacing her chamber, knowing the trial is a sham, knowing the verdict is written before the first word is spoken, and then walking to the scaffold. Calm, composed, dignified. The once beloved queen, now a condemned traitor. The sword fell, and Henry moved on. Jane Seymour was next. Gentle, obedient, the opposite of fiery Anne. She gave Henry what he wanted, a son, Edward. For a moment, Henry's obsession was fulfilled, but Jane died soon after childbirth, and Henry, never one to sit still, was already seeking another alliance. Anne of Cleves came next, a political match to strengthen England's ties to Germany. But Henry found her unattractive. He famously called her the Flanders mare. Cruel, petty. Their marriage was annulled almost immediately. Divorce, Tudor style. Then came Catherine Howard. Young, reckless, barely more than a teenager when Henry, now bloated and aging, made her his queen. At first, she brought him joy, but whispers soon reached his ears. Rumors of affairs. Unlike in Boleyn, Catherine may have actually been guilty, but guilty or not, it didn't matter. The result was the same. Another queen marched to the scaffold. Another head rolled. Finally, Catherine Parr, his sixth and last wife. She was clever enough to outlive him, navigating the minefield of Henry's moods and temper. But think about it. 6 wives. 2 divorced. 2 executed. 1 dead in childbirth. 1 survivor. That's not just a love life. That's a national crisis. Behind every marriage was the political storm. Catherine of Aragon tied England to Spain, and Boleyn broke ties with Rome. Jane Seymour secured a fragile heir. Anne of Cleves embarrassed him internationally. Catherine Howard exposed the dangers of courtly factions. And Catherine Parr? She kept the peace until Henry's final breath. Each wife wasn't just a woman. She was an alliance, A treaty. A gamble. And the cost? Immense. England's monasteries destroyed. Thousands displaced. Wars with Catholic Europe. Executions of nobles, courtiers, even friends. Think of Thomas More, Henry's once loyal companion, executed because he refused to bend. Think of the ordinary people, forced to choose between their king and their faith. And through it all, Henry sat on his throne, convinced it was all God's will, that his desires, his marriages, his divorces, his executions were destiny. Now pause for a moment. Isn't it absurd? 6 wives. Because apparently, one divorced lawyer just wasn't enough. But the punchline is soaked in blood. These weren't harmless affairs. They were battles. And the battlefield was the royal bed. Henry's legacy isn't just gluttony and grandeur. It's the shattered unity of Christendom. It's the thousands who died in his wars. It's the image of a king so desperate for control that he rewrote religion itself to satisfy his heart, or perhaps his pride. So when you hear the rhyme, divorce, beheaded, died, divorce, beheaded, survived, don't just hear a schoolyard chant. Hear the echo of a kingdom torn apart. Because Henry VIII didn't just change wives. He changed history. And he did it one broken marriage at a time. Picture this, a throne room turned into a theater. A courtroom draped in velvet and shadow. Torches flicker. Courtiers lean in, whispering like carrion birds. And at the center of it all, queens. Women crowned in gold, now stripped bare by accusation. Accusations of treason. Accusations of adultery. Accusations that, in truth, needed no proof. Because once suspicion took hold, it was enough. And Boleyn knew it. Once the dazzling star of Henry VIII's court, now reduced to a pawn in his rage. She was accused of betraying her king with men of the court, even her own brother. The evidence? A smile here, a letter there, the way her eyes lingered a moment too long. That was all it took. Picture her standing trial, surrounded by men who had already decided her fate. She argued. She wept. She stood proud. None of it mattered. The verdict was written before she entered the room. And outside the courtroom, the mob gathered. Hungry, thrilled. They didn't care for justice. They wanted blood. For them, this wasn't law. It was theater. And the Queen was the star performer destined to lose her head. Catherine Howard's story was no different. Barely more than a child when she became Henry's 5th wife. Young, reckless, alive with laughter. But the court turned against her. Whispers of flirtations, of affairs. Proof? Hardly. But whispers in a palace are louder than truth. Soon she, too, was dragged before a council. Her youth, once her charm, became her crime. She begged for mercy. She begged for life. And the council, unmoved, passed sentence. Another queen for the scaffold. Another head for the block. Pause here. Imagine being a queen, draped in jewels, surrounded by riches, and yet knowing that every step you take, every word you speak, every glance you give could one day be twisted into a noose. That the crown on your head isn't protection, it's a target. Foreign queens weren't immune, either. In France and Spain, in courts across Europe, suspicion was a weapon. A queen accused of infidelity could bring down dynasties. Why? Because if her child was illegitimate. Then the heir to the throne wasn't the heir at all. It was treason by proxy. The fate of nations hung on whether a queen had been faithful. And all it took was rumor. Picture the interrogations. Cold stone chambers. Men with ink-stained fingers pressing queens for answers. Did you meet him? Did you smile at him? Did you write this letter? Each question designed not to uncover truth, but to confirm guilt. And then the scaffold. Always the scaffold. Queens, who once dined in splendor, now climbing wooden steps before a jeering crowd. The axe gleaming, the executioner waiting. Their final words swallowed by the roar of the mob. There's bitter humor in this, isn't there? Talk about the world's worst HR exit interview. Imagine your boss deciding he doesn't like you anymore, and instead of a pink slip, you get a sword. But the laughter dies quickly, because these weren't farces. They were tragedies. Women, intelligent, ambitious, sometimes reckless, often innocent, destroyed not for crimes committed, but for being inconvenient, for standing in the wrong place, for loving the wrong way, for failing to give a king what he wanted. Every trial was a show, every execution a lesson. The court learned to stay silent, the people learned to cheer, and the queens? They learned too late that power without protection is a fragile crown indeed. So the stage was set. Betrayal, blood, accusations. Queens condemned not by evidence, but by whispers. Queens turned into scapegoats to satisfy mobs and monarchs alike. And history remembers them not just as victims, but as warnings. Because in the Game of Thrones, love could make you a queen, but scandal could make you a corpse. Picture this, a candlelit chamber where whispers slither like snakes. A rumor is born, a glance, a laugh, a careless phrase repeated by the wrong person. By morning, it spreads through the palace. By evening, it gallops across a kingdom. And by the end of the week, that rumor isn't just gossip, it's a weapon. Because in the dangerous world of monarchy, affairs were never just affairs. They were ammunition, sharper than any sword, deadlier than any dagger. Cleopatra knew this firsthand. In Rome, her brilliance, her strategy, her power, none of it mattered. What mattered were the stories Octavian spread. Stories that she was a witch, a sorceress, that she had bewitched Mark Antony into betraying Rome itself. Imagine it. A queen who expanded Egypt's power reduced, in propaganda, to eyeliner and dark magic. Rome didn't need to prove she was dangerous. They only needed people to believe she seduced Antony away from his duty. The weapon wasn't truth. It was perception, and perception kills. Fast forward to Catherine the Great, one of the most formidable rulers of her age. She modernized Russia, expanded its borders, corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers. But what did her enemies whisper? Not her achievements, her lovers, her supposed insatiability. And the most grotesque lie of all, that vile myth about a horse. No evidence, no credibility, but repeated so often, it clung to her name like a stain. Because nothing discredits a powerful woman faster than attacking her body. See the pattern? The greater the queen, the darker the slander. And then Marie Antoinette, the so-called queen of excess. She was accused of affairs, indulgence, corruption. But the scandal that destroyed her wasn't even her fault. The affair of the diamond necklace. A fraudulent scheme involving con men, a necklace worth a fortune, and her name forged into the plot. She never touched the diamonds. She never wanted them, but the public believed otherwise. Pamphlets flew off underground presses. Caricatures spread like wildfire. The queen, already unpopular, was branded greedy, immoral, unfit to rule. And from that moment, every loaf of bread, every empty stomach in Paris screamed her name. That's the danger of scandal. It doesn't need truth. It needs fire. And once lit, it spreads uncontrollably. Imagine underground presses churning out pamphlets. Workers hunched over ink and paper. Words sharpened into daggers. Caricatures mocking kings and queens. By the time those pamphlets hit taverns and marketplaces, they were louder than any royal decree. Mobs didn't read laws. They read lies. And lies travel faster. It's almost funny, isn't it? We think fake news is a modern invention. Twitter mobs. Tabloid headlines. But centuries before hashtags, there were pamphlets, whisper campaigns, anonymous letters. The same formula. Spread outrage. Stir suspicion. Watch power crumble. But there's nothing funny about the consequences. These rumors sent queens to the scaffold. They toppled dynasties. They justified revolts. Scandal was a perfect political weapon because it attacked where rulers were weakest. Their image. You can't assassinate a king every time you want power. But you can assassinate his reputation. Slowly, quietly, until the people no longer trust him. Until allies drift away. Until the throne wobbles. And then strike. Look again at Antony and Cleopatra. Octavian didn't defeat them with swords alone. He defeated them with scandal. He painted their love as treason, their passion as corruption, their dreams as betrayal of Rome. By the time the battle came, Antony's reputation was already ash. His army wasn't just fighting Rome, they were fighting belief. Look at Catherine the Great. She reigned for decades. Yet, what do people remember? The rumors, the lies. Because scandal sticks deeper than truth. Look at Marie Antoinette. She walked to the guillotine not because of a necklace, but because the people believe the story. And once a mob believes, there's no undoing it. So let's be clear. Scandal wasn't entertainment. It wasn't idle chatter. It was war. War fought not with cannons, but with words. A war where every pamphlet was a bullet. Every whisper was a blade. And here's the tragedy. These rulers fought enemies on battlefields, defeated rebellions, survived plagues. But they could not survive the poison of perception. Because when scandal is weaponized, truth doesn't matter. What matters is the story. And once the story takes hold, crowns fall. So remember this. Long before a world of tabloids and clickbait, scandal ruled supreme. It wasn't new then, and it isn't new now. The only difference? Back then, lies didn't just ruin reputations. They destroyed empires. Picture this, a royal bedchamber, sheets tangled, candles still burning low. What begins as a whisper of passion, a secret stolen in the night, ends with kingdoms collapsing. Because when kings and queens let love slip into politics, the result wasn't romance. It was ruin. Take Antony and Cleopatra, lovers who believed their union could conquer the world. Instead, it destroyed them. Their story began with feasts on the Nile, gold and laughter spilling into the night. But it ended in the ruins of Alexandria. Antony, defeated, falling on his own sword. Cleopatra, choosing death by venom rather than humiliation. Two figures who thought themselves gods, reduced to corpses. Their love didn't just end in tragedy. It reshaped the Mediterranean. Rome rose on her ashes, and an empire was born from their ruin. Now shift to England, and Boleyn, once the dazzling star of Henry VIII's court. Her eyes sharp, her wit unmatched. She toppled a queen, broke with the Pope, changed her religion. And yet, 3 years into her reign, she stood accused of adultery and treason. The evidence? Thin. The outcome? Certain. Picture her walking to the scaffold, wind tugging at her gown, the crowd pressing close to watch. One of the most powerful women in Europe. Silenced with a single stroke. Her crime wasn't betrayal. It was failing to give Henry what he wanted. A son. Catherine Howard followed the same path. Young. Reckless. Barely out of childhood when she became Henry's queen. She laughed too freely. She lived too brightly. And the court twisted her light into guilt. Rumors of infidelity, whispers of betrayal. Proof? Questionable. Consequence? Fatal. Dragged to the block. She begged for mercy. None came. Another royal head rolled. Another love story turned into ruin. And then Marie Antoinette, France's glittering queen, painted as frivolous, decadent, corrupt. The diamond necklace scandal clung to her like a curse. She never even touched the jewels. But the people didn't care. Pamphlets mocked her. Caricatures degraded her. The mob chanted her name in fury. And when the revolution came, she was paraded through the streets, jeered, spat upon. Picture her standing before the guillotine, pale but proud. The blade fell, and with it, the monarchy. All this, not because of a war lost, but because of a reputation destroyed. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? Entire empires toppled. Wars fought. Religions shattered. Crowns rolling in the dirt. All because someone couldn't keep their bedroom door shut. But that's the reality. What we see as scandal, what we laugh off as gossip, was political dynamite. Private choices became public catastrophes. A kiss became treason. A letter became evidence. A smile became proof of betrayal. Monarchs who commanded armies, who ruled millions, who stood on thrones of gold, undone by their own desires. And here's the irony. These weren't unique accidents. They were patterns. Over and over, history shows us the same story. Love twisted into ruin. Passion turned to propaganda. Rumor hardened into execution. From Cleopatra's Egypt to Tudor England to revolutionary France, the outcome was always the same. Affairs didn't just ruin reputations. They burned empires to the ground. So as we close this chapter, take a moment. Imagine the empty beds where monarchs once whispered promises. The bloodied scaffolds where queens lost their lives. The deserted thrones where crowns once gleamed. And outside, the roaring of the crowd, hungry, merciless, unrelenting. Because in the end, these weren't fairy tales. They were cautionary tales. And the lesson? When kings and queens let love rule their hearts, ruin ruled their kingdoms. Picture this, the sea, endless and glittering under the Mediterranean sun. Warships stretch across the horizon. Oars splash in rhythm. Drums pound. And on that water, two worlds are about to collide. Not just Rome versus Egypt. Not just Octavian versus Antony. But passion versus politics. Love against empire. And history itself holding its breath. The year is 31 BCE. Mark Antony and Cleopatra have staked everything on this day. Their fleets, their reputations, their crowns, their very lives. Behind them, the riches of Egypt. Before them, the might of Rome, united under Octavian's cold, calculating command. This isn't just a naval battle. It's a showdown of an age. Antony had once been Rome's golden boy, a general of glory, a man trusted with half the empire. But now, Rome whispers he is no longer his own master. That Cleopatra, Egypt's queen, holds his heart, his mind, his very soul in her painted hands. Octavian makes sure everyone believes it. Pamphlets, rumors, tales of Antony dressed in silk, drinking like a god, kneeling before a foreign temptress. Rome didn't just march to war with swords. It marched armed with scandal. And scandal is a sharper weapon than steel. Now picture Antony on the eve of battle. His soldiers restless. His captains divided. Some beg him to send Cleopatra home. To fight as a Roman, not as a lover. But Antony refuses. He cannot abandon her. He will not. To him, Cleopatra is not weakness. She is strength. Together, they are destiny. Gods reborn. Lovers against the world. But Octavian is no fool. He doesn't fight gods. He fights men. And men bleed. He knows Antony's passion is a chain binding him to decisions that will break him. The morning of Actium, the winds turn fickle. Cleopatra's fleet lies gleaming, vast and resplendent, but heavy and slow. Octavian's ships, smaller, swifter, cut the waves like knives. And then it begins. Arrows fly. Siege engines roar. Flames lick across sails. At first, Antony holds strong. His men fight with desperate ferocity. For Rome, for Egypt, for their commander. But as the hours drag, exhaustion sets in. Smoke clouds the sky. The sea itself becomes a graveyard of splintered wood and drowned men. And then it happens. Cleopatra's flagship turns. The queen herself, deciding in that instant, retreats. Her sails catch the wind. Her oars churn. She flees the battle. Why? Strategy? Panic? Historians still argue. But what matters is this. Antony sees her go. And he follows. Yes, the great Roman general, abandoning his fleet, chasing the queen of Egypt across the waves. To his men, it is betrayal. To Octavian, it is victory without lifting a sword. The battle still rages, but its outcome is sealed. With their commander gone, Antony's forces falter. Ships burn. Captains surrender. Thousands die. The Mediterranean turns red with defeat. And in Octavian's cold, methodical war councils, the story writes itself. Antony wasn't defeated by Rome's navy. He was defeated by Cleopatra. By lust. By weakness. Rome didn't just win with swords. It won with gossip and a smear campaign. Imagine the humiliation. Once a hero of Rome, now ridiculed as a lovesick fool. Once a master of legions, now mocked as Cleopatra's puppet. And Cleopatra, once hailed as divine, branded a witch who dared to corrupt a Roman general. The lovers flee back to Egypt, their dreams in ruins. They plan, they scheme, they hope for another chance. But deep down they know, Actium was their Waterloo. Their love, once intoxicating and defiant, has doomed them. Pause for a moment. Isn't it ironic? Antony and Cleopatra believed their passion made them untouchable, that together they could defy the world. But Octavian proved the opposite. Love wasn't their shield. It was their weakness. A weakness he twisted into propaganda, into strategy, into absolute victory. And that victory changed everything. Rome, now united under Octavian, would transform into an empire. Octavian would become Augustus, the first emperor, master of the known world. And Antony and Cleopatra, their names would be etched in history, not for triumph, but for tragedy. Picture the sea after the battle, silent, littered with wreckage, the bodies of soldiers floating, their dreams swallowed by the waves, a crown, gilded and broken, sinking slowly into the depths. That was the cost of a love affair that dared to challenge an empire. So when we remember Actium, don't just think of warships and strategy. Think of two lovers whose choices turned the tide of history. Think of how passion, once their greatest weapon, became their undoing. Because sometimes empires don't fall to armies. Sometimes they fall to love. And at Actium, love met its ruin. Picture this: London in the spring of 1536. The streets hum with whispers. Taverns filled with drunken speculation. Courtiers darting from chamber to chamber, eyes sharp, tongues sharper. Something is happening at the very heart of the kingdom. The queen in Bullen is falling. Not long ago, she was dazzling. The woman who captivated Henry VIII. The woman who made him defy the Pope. The woman who split England from Rome, just to place a crown upon her head. She had been untouchable, or so it seemed. But in Henry's court, love could turn to loathing in the space of a heartbeat. The accusations came like daggers in the dark. Adultery, treason, betrayal of the king himself, her supposed lovers, men of the court, even her own brother. Outrageous charges. Absurd. But absurdity didn't matter. Henry wanted and gone, and the law bent like iron in his fist. Picture the trial. A grand hall transformed into a stage for vengeance. And stands alone, her dark eyes burning, her voice steady as she denies the charges. She knows the evidence is flimsy. She knows the trial is a performance. The verdict already decided. Around her, nobles whisper, some smirking, some pale with fear. Every word she speaks falls into silence, swallowed by the certainty of her doom. Outside, London buzzes. Pamphlets fly. Rumors spread like wildfire. The mob, hungry for blood, delights in every sordid detail. Was the queen truly unfaithful? Did she betray her king? Few care about truth. Scandal tastes sweeter. And in the palace corridors, courtiers maneuver. Rivals position themselves for power, eager to replace the queen they once bowed to. Jane Seymour waits quietly in the wings, Henry's new favorite, her future already written in Anne's shadow. And so-called allies abandon her. Men who had sworn loyalty now remain silent. Friends vanish. Even family falters. In Henry's England, survival means betrayal. Anne learns, too late, that crowns cannot protect you from daggers made of whispers. Then comes the verdict. Guilty, not because of evidence, but because Henry demanded it. Adultery, treason, death. The city holds its breath and is taken to the Tower of London. Those thick, ancient walls have witnessed countless tragedies, but few as bitter as this. Imagine Anne walking through the gate she once entered as queen. This time, she is a prisoner. The same tower that had crowned her triumph now prepares to claim her life. She spends her final days in prayer, composed, resolute, dignity her last armor. Outside, the scaffold is being built, a wooden platform, a sword sharpened, a crowd already gathering, eager for the spectacle. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, and dresses with care, not in jewels or silks, but in modest gown and cloak. She knows every detail will be remembered. She knows history is watching. The crowd presses in as she steps onto the scaffold. Murmurs ripple through the air. Some expect a broken woman. Instead, they see calm, grace, and speaks, her voice clear, offering no accusation, no bitterness. She prays for the king, for England, for her soul. Even now, she plays the role of queen. And then the silence. The executioner raises his sword. One swift strike. The queen is no more. The crowd gasps. The tower bells toll. Think of the irony. This was the woman who changed the course of England, who shattered its ties with Rome, who wore the crown because a king tore the world apart for her. And now, that same king condemned her, using the same passion that once exalted her as the excuse to destroy her. Henry basically invented ghosting, only with executions. But beneath the sarcasm lies tragedy. Anne's fall wasn't just personal, it was political. Her execution sent shockwaves through England. It taught everyone a lesson. Queens could be replaced, wives could be discarded, and no one, not even a crown consort, was safe from the whims of a king. Picture her final walk again. The tower's cold stones beneath her feet. The crowd roaring, some with pity, most with hunger for drama. And regal to the end, knowing she was more than a victim. She was a warning. Her daughter, Elizabeth, would one day rule England with unmatched brilliance. But in 1536, no one knew that. All they saw was a queen undone, a marriage turned into a death sentence. Love had made her queen. Love had destroyed her. And so Anne Boleyn's walk to the scaffold became more than just the end of one woman's life. It became the ultimate symbol of how dangerous royal passion could be. How quickly whispers turn to trials. How swiftly crowns turn into coffins. The story ends not with triumph, but with silence. A silence broken only by the crowd's murmur as the Queen's body was carried away. And England moved on. The court dressed for another wedding, another coronation, another queen, because in the Tudor world, love wasn't sacred. It was disposable, and when it soured, it could kill. Picture this: Versailles at twilight, chandeliers blazing, gilded halls echoing with laughter, the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, gliding through rooms draped in silk, jewels glittering at her throat. To some, she is the very embodiment of elegance. To others, she is excess personified. And in that tension, between admiration and hatred, lies her undoing. Now, Marie Antoinette did plenty to fuel gossip. She loved luxury. She built the Petit Trianon, a private escape where she played at rustic life while the peasants struggled for bread. She dazzled in gowns that cost fortunes and wigs that looked like architectural projects. But her greatest scandal wasn't even real. It was a lie, a fraud, a story so absurd it belongs in a bad soap opera. And yet it destroyed her. The diamond necklace affair. Here's how it unfolded. A pair of con artists devised a scheme to sell an opulent diamond necklace worth a staggering fortune. A necklace originally crafted for a king's mistress, dripping with hundreds of stones. The fraudsters tricked Cardinal de Rohan, an ambitious cleric desperate to regain the queen's favor, into believing he was helping Marie secretly purchase it. They forged letters. They staged secret meetings with a woman disguised as a queen. The cardinal fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. But when the fraud unraveled, when the necklace vanished, the blame didn't fall on the swindlers. It fell on Marie. Imagine the absurdity. Marie Antoinette never ordered the necklace. She never touched it. She didn't want it. But the public decided otherwise. To them, it was proof. Proof that she was greedy, corrupt, manipulative. A queen willing to bankrupt her people for glittering stones. Pamphlets spread like wildfire. Caricatures showed her dripping in diamonds, smirking at starving peasants. Rumors hissed through taverns and marketplaces. The story twisted, growing uglier with every retelling. The queen, they whispered, had used her sexuality to manipulate the cardinal. She had schemed in the shadows, seducing a man of God to feed her endless hunger for jewels. Was it true? Of course not. Did it matter? Not one bit, because perception is stronger than truth. Picture the smoky taverns of Paris. Men hunched over mugs of wine, reading aloud lurid pamphlets. Crowds laughing, jeering, shaking their heads. The story of the necklace becomes a public performance. The queen's reputation, the fragile crown she wore outside her palace, crumbled under the weight of scandal. And here's the cruel irony. Marie's real crime wasn't lust. It wasn't manipulation. It was luxury. She lived too visibly, too extravagantly, in a time when France was cracking under hunger and debt. The diamond necklace affair gave revolutionaries exactly what they needed: a symbol, a villain, A queen who supposedly embodied everything rotten about monarchy. The truth? Irrelevant. The lie was far more powerful. Even Versailles couldn't shield her. Outside its gilded gates, mobs chanted. Bread was scarce, taxes high, resentment boiling, and the queen, whether innocent or not, became the face of their rage. It's almost funny in a bitter way. Imagine being canceled over jewelry you never even wore. A fraud cooked up by strangers sealed her fate more effectively than any war or political defeat. And yet, the consequences were anything but funny. The affair deepened the chasm between crown and people. It fanned the flames of revolution. By the time Marie Antoinette stood before the guillotine, it wasn't the memory of her actual life that condemned her. It was the myth, the scandal, the endless whispers that painted her as corrupt, heartless, and obscene. Her head rolled not for crimes committed, but for stories believed. So let's step back. What destroyed Marie Antoinette wasn't just politics or poverty or revolution. It was perception. A single scandal, magnified and twisted, turned her into the perfect villain. And once a queen becomes a villain in the eyes of her people, the throne beneath her is nothing but wood waiting to burn. Picture the jewels glinting in candlelight. Picture the pamphlets passed from hand to hand. Picture the mob roaring outside Versailles, their fury sharpened by lies. That is the diamond necklace affair. A story where the queen never touched the diamonds, yet they became the heaviest weight she ever carried. Picture this, a throne room, silent. The gilded chair stands empty. The crown, once polished blind, now dulled and abandoned. Torches flicker against cracked stone. Outside, the mob roars, or worse, falls into silence. The monarch is gone, not from battle, not from conquest, but from scandal, from whispers, from the fragile web of reputation that could snap in an instant. This is the fall of the untouchables. Cleopatra and Antony, once radiant, worshipped as living gods, reduced to fugitives in their own palace. Their love, their gamble, ended not in coronation, but in death. He on his sword, she with venom to her breast. Octavian's propaganda did what armies could not. It made Antony a fool, Cleopatra a witch, and together they became cautionary tales of passion mistaken for power. Their thrones vanished with them. Anne Boleyn, once untouchable in Henry's court, Queen of England by fire and fury, led to the scaffold by rumor and resentment. She who split England from Rome now stood accused of treason by men who whisper her downfall into being. One stroke of the sword, and the queen who thought herself secure was erased. The lesson? A crown is no shield when a king's heart turns cold. And Marie Antoinette, glittering in Versailles, adored for a time, then despised as France cracked beneath hunger. She never touched the infamous diamonds. She never schemed for that necklace. Yet pamphlets painted her as corrupt, decadent, obscene. She became the villain of a nation, and that image walked her straight to the guillotine. Her throne toppled not by generals, but by gossip printed in smoky backrooms. See the pattern? These monarchs weren't destroyed by invading armies. They were destroyed by perception, by passion, by whispers slipping under doors and spreading like wildfire. The tragic irony? They believed themselves untouchable. They believed their crowns, their armies, their titles made them invincible. And yet, they fell faster than any fortress wall. It's almost laughable. Apparently, the real WMD of history wasn't cannon fire. It was a rumor mill. Think about it. Cleopatra wasn't toppled because Rome stormed Egypt. She was toppled because Octavian convinced Rome she was dangerous. And Boleyn wasn't executed because she betrayed her husband. She was executed because Henry believed the whispers that suited him. Marie Antoinette wasn't hated because of jewels she bought. She was hated because people wanted to believe she did. Whispers became truth. Truth became verdict. Verdict became execution. And in each case, the throne was left hollow. Empty chairs, blood-stained stones, crowds cheering or jeering, or simply moving on to the next name, the next scandal. But let's not forget the cost. These weren't just personal tragedies. They reshaped nations. Antony and Cleopatra's fall cleared the path for Rome to crown its first emperor. Anne's death ensured Elizabeth would one day reign, reshaping England forever. Marie Antoinette's humiliation ignited revolution, sending shockwaves through all of Europe. Private choices became public catastrophes, and love stories became the scripts of collapse. So imagine the ruins. A tattered crown lying in dust, pamphlets blowing through an empty square where mobs once chanted, palaces gutted by fire, their marble blackened, their corridors silent. That's a legacy of passion turned poison. The lesson is clear. Thrones are fragile, crowns are heavy, and the real danger wasn't always armies at the gate. It was lies in the dark, because history shows us this. When desire meets power, kingdoms crack. When scandal meets rumor, thrones fall. And when love dares to challenge empire, the empire usually wins. Picture this: the palace at night, torches guttering low, halls that once echoed with laughter now heavy with silence. A crown rests on a velvet cushion, abandoned. Next to it, scraps of parchment, love notes, promises, whispers, curling into ash. This is how empires end. Not always on battlefields. Not always by invading armies. Sometimes they end in bedrooms. It's almost funny, isn't it? Monarchs who commanded thousands. Monarchs who bent nations to their will. Monarchs who survived wars, rebellions, plagues. Undone by desire, by jealousy, by the vulnerabilities that made them human. The great irony of history? The most dangerous battlefield was the royal mattress. Think back to Antony and Cleopatra. A general and a queen, dreaming themselves divine. Their passion wasn't just private. It was political dynamite. Octavian didn't need sharper swords. He had sharper rumors. He branded Antony a traitor, bewitched by a foreign temptress. And Cleopatra? A witch who corrupted Rome. Their love story ended in suicide and empire's collapse. The Mediterranean was forever reshaped, all because two lovers believed passion could rival politics. Or Henry VIII, the king who couldn't keep his heart or his temper in check. 6 wives, 2 executed, 1 empire torn from Rome's embrace. His obsession with heirs shattered Christendom itself. England was never the same. And why? Because Henry couldn't accept disappointment in his bedroom. Desire became doctrine. Obsession became religion. Thousands died, not because of armies, but because of one man's cravings. And then Marie Antoinette, a queen who never even touched the infamous necklace that destroyed her. A fraud, a scam, a con, weaponized into scandal. Pamphlets mocked her. Caricatures painted her as corrupt. The people didn't care for truth. They cared for the story. And the story turned her into a villain, walking her to the guillotine. Her real crime wasn't lust. It was perception. The revolution didn't need her blood. It needed her image. See the thread? Empires undone not by armies clashing in fields, but by whispers in corridors. Love letters twisted into treason. Pamphlets sharper than blades. Rumors louder than church bells. Kings and queens who thought themselves untouchable, toppled by scandals born in the most private spaces. It should unsettle us. These were rulers with fortresses, legions, crowns forged in gold. And yet, their true downfall was as fragile as a human heart. Antony's devotion, Henry's obsession, Marie's reputation. Vulnerabilities, so ordinary, so painfully human. And maybe that's why these stories stick. Because they aren't about faceless armies or endless treaties. They're about jealousy, passion, betrayal, things we all understand. Strip away the velvet robes, the jewels, the thrones, and what do you find? People, flawed, reckless, vulnerable, and their private choices set fire to entire nations. It makes you wonder, how many wars were fought not for glory or justice, but because a king fell in love with the wrong woman? How many revolutions were sparked not by famine alone, but by scandal? How many crowns rolled because someone couldn't control their desire? History books tell us empires are strong, that crowns are heavy with permanence. But the truth is they're fragile. A single rumor can break them. A single affair can destroy them. A single scandal can burn them to ash. Picture it again. Empty palace halls. Crowns forgotten on cushions. Lovers' notes turned to cinders. That is a legacy of passion unchecked. So yes, wars may shape orders. Battles may decide kings. But sometimes the true turning points of history are found behind closed doors. And the lesson? Power may look invincible, but desire is stronger. Picture the smoky medieval hall. Courtiers huddle in shadows, whispering about who slipped into whose chamber after midnight. Now, picture a modern street. Flashbulbs explode as paparazzi chase a celebrity into a car. Two scenes, centuries apart. But really, the exact same story. Scandal is timeless. From Cleopatra's barge to Anne Boleyn's scaffold to Marie Antoinette's necklace, private lives have always carried public weight, and it hasn't stopped. Swap torch-lit mobs for Twitter mobs, parchment pamphlets for tabloids, gossiping courtiers for online comment sections. And the game is still the same. Why? Because scandal weaponizes the things that never change. Curiosity, envy, moral outrage. Humans are drawn to other people's secrets like moths to flame, especially when those secrets involve power. Take medieval courts. One whispered rumor about a queen's fidelity could topple dynasties. A single accusation could delegitimize heirs, unravel treaties, spark wars. Fast forward to today, and careers, reputations, entire industries still implode from whispers, screenshots, or a viral headline. Kings had pamphlets. Celebrities have hashtags, different tools, same outcome. And don't laugh too quickly. Those pamphlets were just as vicious as Twitter threads. Anonymous writers lampooning queens, drawing grotesque caricatures, spreading lies until they felt like truth. Does that sound familiar? Because it should. A scandal today doesn't need facts, just clicks. A scandal then didn't need evidence, just whispers. But here's the chilling part. Back then, rumors could send queens to the scaffold. Today, they can still destroy legacies. Crowns fall, careers burn, empires, political or cultural, shatter under the same fragile weight, reputation. Picture the through line. Anne Boleyn accused of lovers she never had. Catherine the Great smeared with grotesque lies. Marie Antoinette vilified by a diamond necklace she never touched. Now, picture a celebrity canceled for something they didn't say or didn't do, but everyone believed anyway. The mechanism hasn't changed. Belief beats truth every time, and we can't look away. That's the other truth. Scandal thrives because we feed it. Crowds gathered outside palaces, waiting to see queens condemned. Crowds today gather online, refreshing news feeds, waiting for the next headline. Centuries apart, the mob is the same. Hungry, loud, relentless. So maybe the most sobering lesson is this. Scandal is a mirror. It reflects less about those in power and more about us, the audience. Our envy, our outrage, our insatiable curiosity. Because without the crowd, without the whispers spreading, scandal dies in silence. But history shows us it never does. From royal courts to red carpets, the ripple effect remains. Private choices made public. Whispers magnified into roars. And once the story catches fire, there's no putting it out. Reputation still destroys crowns, still destroys careers, still destroys legacies. And maybe it always will. Picture this, the ruins of a palace. Once it gleamed with gold. Now, its halls echo only with wind. The throne sits empty. The crown lies crooked on the ground, dust creeping into its jewels. And all because of a kiss, a glance, a rumor whispered in the dark. If love and lust could topple empires, what chance do the rest of us really have? Think about it. Antony and Cleopatra. Their passion redrew the map of the Mediterranean, then sank it in flames at Actium. Henry VIII. His obsessions tore England out of Rome's orbit and left bodies stacked beneath the shadow of his throne. And Boleyn, Catherine Howard. Both queens, both beheaded, not because of what they did, but because of what was believed. Marie Antoinette, sent to the guillotine over a necklace she never even touched. All of them, powerful, untouchable, immortal in their own eyes, undone by the most ordinary of human impulses. Passion, jealousy, betrayal. It's almost absurd, isn't it? Forget nuclear codes. Forget atomic bombs. The real red button of history was romance. A king's crush. A queen's secret. A rumor with just enough spice to ignite a revolution. And here's the cruel truth. You can command armies. You can build fortresses. You can terrify your enemies with steel and fire. But you cannot armor the heart. You cannot silence the whisper. And one scandal escapes. It spreads like smoke, choking the air until crowns tumble. So, what we learn? That history is not only shaped by battles and treaties. It's shaped by desire, by envy, by secrets slipping from the bedroom into the streets. That the fate of millions once hinged not on strategy, but on who the king fancied after dinner. It should make us laugh. And it should make us shiver. Because scandal never dies. Picture those deserted castles. Those ruined statues, faces weathered but still watching. And then picture modern headlines. A ticker flashing across your screen. A photograph taken at midnight. A rumor trending on social media. The tools have changed. The hunger has not. Empires may fall. Thrones may rot. But scandal? Scandal endures. And if it could topple kings and queens, what chance do the rest of us really have?